Hello, everyone, and welcome to Podcast by the Fire. This is our second episode representing the week of January 7th to January 13th. This is your host, Ilias Leonidas. Just a quick word about this series. We'll have a couple of these videos coming out as we play catch up. I want to make sure we have at least one video a week for this series. So we're going to have about 52 videos, hopefully, during the course of this year. Since we started this series a little bit later, we're going to put out a couple of videos to catch up. And then once we catch up, we should have a weekly posting of this podcast series. And I will determine and decide which day we will post our podcast series. It will probably most likely be Wednesday or Tuesday, though that may change, and we'll see how it ends up going. Now, for the topic of our second podcast for the second week of 2019. The topic today is going to be Bethesda. Bethesda as a whole, but more specifically, Bethesda Game Studios. Now, Bethesda Game Studios, for any of you that may not be familiar, are the people that make the Elder Scrolls series and the people that make the modern Fallout games and the modern Fallout series. Now, that one, I'm sure a lot more of you are aware of, given the recent events that have happened to Bethesda and the recent situation regarding the Fallout series. That is to say, what has happened with the release of Fallout 76. Now, Fallout 76 is a game I did not play. It's a game I did not want to get, and a game that really turned me off the series. For anyone that wouldn't be aware, Fallout 76 was the newest installment of the Fallout series. This one was set in West Virginia, but unlike all the other previous Fallouts, this one was meant to be multiplayer, kind of an MMORPG, always online. One of the unique tags about this uniquely online Fallout series was every single person in the game, at least human character, would be a fellow player. So everyone that you would see in the game world that was a human was a fellow person that was also playing online. One of the trade-offs to this was they removed effectively any human NPCs, and the game became and was created largely devoid of a lot of characters and NPCs to give you quests and to create a sense of environment and kind of the living feeling that you get in a lot of other games, especially a lot of other Bethesda games, which one of Bethesda's core strengths was the environment and characters it created. Now, Fallout 76 created a divide in a lot of the fan base. Some people really enjoyed the idea. Playing with friends online can be amazing, especially in a game that you love, if it's done well and if it's done right. Other people, like myself, are more of single-player purists. I never played the Fallout series, and I never really played the Elder Scrolls series that much, and thought, you know what, I need other people in this game. I always just thought I wanted larger and better single-player experiences. So with Bethesda's decision to make Fallout 76 a multiplayer experience, it turned off a lot of players, and as I've said, myself included. And I think this was one of the first big missteps of Bethesda Game Studios. Fallout 76 now, after its absolutely terrible launch, has become a complete joke and an embarrassment for Bethesda Game Studios. It's destroyed a lot of the credibility, the reputation, and kind of the veneration, and even for myself, my willingness to overlook some of Bethesda's problems or characteristics. Because when Bethesda makes good games like Skyrim, Oblivion, And to me, the Fallout 3 or even Fallout 4, even with their bugs, their issues, their somewhat and sometimes incomplete storytelling, the world and the environment they create is just so immersive. It dunks me into this wonderful place they've created. It makes me forgive or forget certain features or problems that the game has. That's not to say that we should forget those, but a game that is entertaining and a game that makes you enjoy it and makes you immersed in it can sometimes be forgiven for the faults it has. Fallout 76 is not and does not follow this prior formula that a lot of other Bethesda titles have had. While a lot of other Bethesda titles have always had bugs, somewhat terrible launches, and sometimes not the best writing in certain storytelling narratives or arcs, that doesn't mean that they're all terrible games. To me, almost all the Bethesda games to this point were amazing, awesome, and some of the best games I've ever played. And that was because of those world building. And that world building that we were talking about was just so unreal, so amazing. It transported me to Tamriel and the Elder Scrolls series. It made me feel like a post-apocalyptic wasteland that I had lived in my entire life when I played the Fallout series. Hell, even when I traveled to DC for the first time after playing Fallout 3, because of the detail and design of Fallout 3, I knew the layout of DC. I could get around DC from playing this well-crafted and amazing game. That's not to say Fallout 3 was perfect, because Fallout 3 had a lot of bugs. Its engine was old even for when it was released, and its graphics looked dated and drabbed at certain points. Though, with the story and the environment it painted, a bleak apocalyptic wasteland, it wasn't the worst feature. It was overlookable in a lot of ways, at least in my opinion. And I will totally admit, I am a fanboy for Bethesda, at least in a sense. I love their games, and I'm willing to overlook some of these issues, some of these problems, some of the dated graphics, or some of the kind of mechanical issues, if they can create the immersive, all-encompassing environments that they have been able to create in the past. I am not, however, a fanboy for any franchise to the point where I can't admit that they screwed up real bad. And Bethesda with Fallout 76 screwed up immensely. Now, there's a multitude of ways and reasons Bethesda screwed up with Fallout 76. At least in my opinion, the first problem or first screw up was changing it to an online platform, changing it to a MMORPG type experience. Normally, I'm a heavy single player fan, and I'm not the biggest fan of MMORPGs. Though, to be honest, I actually enjoyed the Elder Scrolls Online. I still play it occasionally, and I enjoy getting deeper and a wider variety of the lore of Tamriel as a whole. That's not to say that that game is anywhere near close to any of the single player experiences, because it's not to me. The Elder Scrolls Online is probably my favorite MMORPG, but I really don't care for MMORPGs. And the only reason it's my favorite is because it gives me opportunities to experience more and build upon my knowledge of the lore of a universe and world that I already loved and adored. And to me, building an MMORPG, especially off an established single-player franchise, is already asking for a lot of trouble. So Bethesda already had that going against them. But then Bethesda already had other things going against them that they've done for years. As we were talking about this world building that they are amazing at, we always accept that world because it's amazing, but we always know about the bugs. Every Fallout game, every Elder Scrolls game, every Bethesda game has bugs. Often pretty bad game breaking bugs. And it's at least forgivable once if you can recover and they update it enough to the point you can play it, that experience that you get once it's all fixed is amazing. It's awesome, it's entertaining, and it's immersive. But for Fallout 76, and while again I have not played it myself, I've watched many a video, looked at many a review, and I've seen a couple of people I know play it. It's really, it doesn't fit these other formulas because these bugs and these crashes and these day one issues are forgivable in Skyrim because there's something deeper. In Fallout 76, there isn't anything deeper. That leads us to the other problem with Fallout 76 and the other decision Bethesda made to make Fallout 76, in my opinion, kind of this mess and this problematic game. The decision to eliminate all NPCs, at least all NPCs that are human, from a Bethesda game was one of the single worst decisions I think they could have done. And when I was already turned off with the game because it was going to be an MMORPG, when they announced that, it put the nail in the coffin. I made sure I wasn't going to order it, and I was very apprehensive that I was going to enjoy this game at all. And it could have been a good game, and I still wouldn't have liked the format, but it wasn't a good game. And it, I believe, is because of these NPCs, because these human NPCs weren't there. In other Bethesda titles, we remember characters from those games. Those characters, those human NPCs, those people that talk with us, help us get immersed into that amazing world. Maybe it looks visually stunning and there's a lot of detail, at least in the geographical sense or in the visual sense, but having those characters helps cement that immersed feeling. It helps really ground you into that world. For example, from Fallout New Vegas, you had a wonderful cast of companions that were all amazing and awesome and just connected you with this weird and wacky place. From Lily to Rex, the companions just were unbelievable. And even some of the characters that weren't companions, Mr. House made it feel like you were in that world. Caesar or Kaiser made you feel like you were in a post-apocalyptic world where a madman ran an attempted rebirth of a Roman empire, or at least a pseudo-Roman barbarian empire. And that's true for almost every Bethesda game before this disaster and monstrosity that is Fallout 76. They all had great, rememberable characters. While some were bugged and did weird things, or you had a Preston Garvey that wouldn't ever shut up, they're still rememberable. Even in annoying ways, they make you remember and tie you to that world or to that universe. I absolutely loved Piper in Fallout 4. I enjoyed her as a character, and I enjoyed a lot of the companions in that game, and they really helped ground that reality. They helped me immerse into Fallout 4, which, as a fan of the Fallout series, is actually my favorite Fallout game, though I am more than willing to admit, from a mechanical and writing perspective, it is probably the worst Fallout game until this monstrosity, which I'm never glad to see a company I love and a company I enjoyed their games fall apart. I am slightly happy that Fallout 4 is no longer the worst Fallout game in the franchise. That's a little happy note, at least for me. But I'm not really happy about how we got here, and happy that Fallout 4 will no longer be the worst game in most people's eyes, because Fallout 76 is an absolute mess that they created. Getting myself back on track. These NPCs that didn't exist in Fallout 76 don't help create this grounded feel that you have in all the other Bethesda titles. And that's a huge thing. And when all the bugs and the glitches and the amazingly terrible restarts that force you to restart the entire game occur, if that experience, that immersive dialogue, or that those characters that just make you laugh or make you want to see them again aren't there, it makes the experience hollow and not want to come back. And that's what happened with Fallout 76. Since I haven't played it, I have watched many of those videos, and I can't say exactly if all of them, but the vast majority of them come from logs. These are just detached audio logs, kind of similar to this podcast in a sense, but this is for a video game, a AAA title that's supposed to have you playing for hours and hours and keep you entertained, not just for a short period of time, but tie you to the story and to that world. And it doesn't. And I've listened to some of them, and some people from their reviews and comments I've seen do say sometimes the stories are okay or are good, but the vast majority of them, even if they're good or even if they were extremely well written, they really can't do much when every single quest line is just audio. There's no characters to attach you or to ground you, nothing visually to make you remember this amazing experience and environment, and nothing really unique about it. It just feels generic and like a cash grab, which, at least in my opinion, it ultimately was from Bethesda. They saw this amazing success with some things I think they did really well with Fallout 4, like releasing it, announcing it in, I believe, June or E3, and then releasing it, 5 months later. They built a lot of hype, and they delivered a product rather quickly. It wasn't this long developmental cycle where we constantly moaned and groaned about, what will or will not be in it. And Fallout 4, again, to me, is definitely an enjoyable and worthwhile game. It had its problems too, and it's honestly a lot of the same problems of 76, which is another issue we're going to talk about that Bethesda has. But Fallout 4 at least had wacky characters. At least you could see these places. You could feel like there was towns that were lived in, and you could create towns that were lived in. You could create settlements that were awesome and settlements that were wacky and cool, but you could feel like you were rebuilding the wasteland. It wasn't perfect, and mods make it by far better than the base experience, but there was some ideas, concepts, and at least try or attempts to make a very entertaining game on top of a normal Bethesda experience. Fallout 76, returning to that point about Fallout 76 having a lot of the same problems or bugs as Fallout 4, is just Fallout 4 a couple years later. And the worst part is it doesn't visually change much from what I can tell, and it doesn't seem to really improve all that much from the Fallout 4 experience, which is ridiculous from a AAA developer or AAA studio. That doesn't mean that visually everything has to be 10 times better. Look at a game like Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. New Vegas wasn't the epitome of graphical improvements, but New Vegas had a very well-written story, a lot of interesting concepts, ideas, and a lot of very interesting attempts at developing a game. And that made New Vegas, at least in my opinion, the best written Fallout game in the entire series. And the best story, and especially the best player freedom and choices in the series. So Fallout 76 could have lived with being a clone of Fallout 4, but Fallout 76 doesn't get improved on. The engine is still buggy and terrible and still has its problems. And ultimately, the biggest problem with Fallout 76, especially when compared to Fallout New Vegas, is there's no improvement on characters, on story. It's not a better written story with greater choices or immersion. It's not a better environment. It's a weaker one. And this weaker environment, story, and design makes Fallout 76 even worse. And part of this is probably Bethesda, because Fallout New Vegas wasn't made by Bethesda. Fallout New Vegas was made by Obsidian. But Obsidian built off many concepts and things that Fallout 3 had done. It was built off the same engine. But Bethesda rehashing a world they built, when the world building that they do is kind of the main draw, to me at least, in their series and in their games, is kind of the issue. Because while Fallout 4 while Fallout 4 has mixed reviews, but to me is still a great game, Fallout 76 really does just feel like a clone. It doesn't allow Bethesda to show off a whole new amount of world building, especially with that lack of characters. It just makes it feel like a copy and paste job, which it really was in a lot of sense, and it really seems like it at the very least. Fallout 76 is a huge blemish upon Bethesda. And I know what many of you might think, well, Bethesda wasn't perfect to begin with, or, I don't really like their games, or Fallout 4 was already bad, or, a wide variety of things. But Fallout 76 is a different beast. Fallout 76 is a point, I think, in which Bethesda as a studio made a lot of other bad decisions. And it wasn't just Bethesda's kind of problems with writing and storytelling coming to the forefront. And it wasn't just the lack of showing off Bethesda's ability to story and world build in that sense. The biggest problem in Fallout 76, I think, was either design decisions mixed with these other problems that we've been talking about, / economic decisions. What I mean by that was their design decision to exclude NPC human characters, to exclude towns, cities, places that help you immerse and gather you in places within the wasteland or within whatever story they're telling. And the design decision to rely on other characters and other players to trade items and kind of make this weird barter system. It's almost like they had too much good faith. It's like they've never played an online game, because in online games, people break down, and the society, when left to only the player's design, often really doesn't flow or function right. And I don't know what they were thinking from a design perspective, that having no NPCs meant players would willingly trade and they wouldn't do these other terrible things. It was a really dumb decision. And I think part of that thought that they had, that players would just willingly be traders or barterers, or would effectively replace the NPCs that they didn't put into the story, was another really bad design decision, which was effectively making PvP non-existent, which is unimaginably stupid in an MMORPG, especially an MMORPG that is literally player focused, where there's not any real NPCs around, or if there is, they're very few and they're really not that relatable. So these design decisions were just horrific, in my opinion, and really idiotic, but I don't know. And this is my thought process on it, my opinion. I don't know either if they're truly just design choices or if they were partly economic decisions by a big company. You know, they had the success off of Fallout 4. Could we build a game that, one, could get us loot boxes and microtransactions, which is another thing we'll get into in Fallout 76, but also really tone down the cost of development, tone down by not requiring as extensive amount of character design and development, tone it down by maybe eliminating a lot of voices and extra additional characters that we don't need to build in there, and tone it down by not needing to build at least highly detailed cityscapes. Not that they didn't design certain environments, places, or locations within Fallout 76. And again, I haven't played it fully. I've only ever really watched other YouTubers play it or seen friends play it. It just feels like they really, really either made a lot of extremely terrible design decisions, or they made design decisions with very economic decisions in mind. And that just ultimately ruined so much of what Fallout 76 could have at least done right. So Fallout 76 also has another design issue, at least in my opinion, because I'm not a fan of them, and also another economically chosen issue, which is this wonderfully terrible loot box mechanic that is pervasing more and more games and more beloved franchise. It is a gambling thing, in my opinion, especially ones that have random, especially loot box systems that are random, but even ones that aren't specifically loot boxes, even if an in-game store, especially when they create these artificial currencies that don't tell you in reality the cost of the item you're buying. It's a very, very cynical ploy, in my opinion, by a lot of companies to get people to spend more money, and in a very nefarious way. It tricks people into thinking, I'm only spending, I think it was atoms is the currency, Fallout 76. I'm only spending 1,000 atoms instead of whatever the real world cost of that is, which I think it was actually pretty high, which was another ridiculous decision. But so here we are. We have a huge amount of design choices and economic choices going into this game, into Fallout 76, that make it a lot weaker of a game and a terrible game in a lot of ways. And added on top of these previously discussed problems Bethesda has with pretty much all of their titles, made Fallout 76 this mess we have before us. It's a game that has all the trappings and problems of a Bethesda game, which I'll admit, fans like me enable Bethesda to get away with having bugs and issues, because once they fix those, I love their worlds. But in a game like Fallout 76, because of these design or economic choices, there's nothing deeper once the bugs are fixed, which in Fallout 76, it doesn't seem like they get fixed. It seems like they get worse and worse. But it just leads to this monstrosity that is Fallout 76. A terribly designed game, a economically advantageous game. I understand games are a business and companies need to make money, but there's a difference when a game is designed to make money and not be a game, versus a game that's designed to be a good game and make money because it's such a good game it sells. And I ultimately feel like that's the legacy and that's the identity of Fallout 76. It's a cash grab, a poor designed and ill-conceived idea built off of the crumbling infrastructure that is typical of Bethesda, but at least is usually swept under the rug, especially by fans like me that are willing to look past it for the amazing world or story. But there isn't anything to look past, or you're unable to because of so many issues. So for me, right now, Bethesda, they have kind of hit a big wall. Does that mean I think Bethesda as a studio is terrible and it's debunked all of these reviews or other things about previous games? No, I think a lot of their previous games are still amazing and still worthy of being praised and played. They do have problems, and this consistent problem for Bethesda, these consistent bugs, outdated engines and outdated graphics are stuff that are inexcusable, especially in a really bad game like Fallout 76. It makes it 10 times worse. Now, let's move on to a little bit of a second part here on talking about Bethesda. Let's talk about the future a little bit, and let's talk about post-Fallout 76. Post-Fallout 76, Bethesda has done everything wrong that they can really do. They've pissed off their fans. They had that whole canvas bag catastrophe, which if you don't know about, people that ordered the, I believe, legendary, or basically the special edition, the highest paid one, we're supposed to get an assortment of items, which included a kind of mock version of a power helmet, which is a helmet from kind of the power armor in the Fallout universe. And it was supposed to come in a canvas bag. The bags they gave were cheap knockoff bags instead, and it became a fiasco. And it summed up and was the main thing of the legacy of Fallout 76 and how Bethesda has handled it. And I think those canvas bags are actually a prime example. What Bethesda promised and what Fallout 76 could have been was these canvas bags. Something that looked nice, that not necessarily was going to be as deep as the other Fallout games, but still could have been enjoyable and something to have. But instead, just like the people that bought these special editions, we didn't get canvas bags. We got cheap knockoffs. We got a cheap knockoff that was Fallout 76. 76 is the cheapest knockoff we could have asked for, and in my opinion at least, the worst game Bethesda has ever made thus far. Bethesda Game Studios, that is. And leaving out the fact that it's an MMORPG, and it could have been a good game. Like I said, I absolutely adore the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, that was made by ZeniMax, or at least that's who handles most of it, or if not all of it. And so it is different people developing it, but that's their parent company. And somehow not being able to give an experience at least comparable to the Elder Scrolls Online just makes this so much worse. And the Elder Scrolls Online could have been a prime example. That game wasn't always a success when it first launched. A lot of pushback and a lot of people didn't like it, but at least the Elder Scrolls Online when it came out wasn't quite this catastrophe, both in design and especially in my opinion in the PR and handling by Bethesda. It has definitely seemed like Bethesda wants to not acknowledge that Fallout 76 was as bad as they say it is, because honestly, from an economic standpoint, I don't know for sure, and I'm not speaking off of any statistics, but it seemed like a decent amount of people did buy the game. It might not have been the success that they wanted, but it might not have been the bomb we all associate it with being, because many people may have gotten it already. Its sales were probably not amazing and not comparable to Fallout 4 or other games, but it wasn't like no one picked this up. Many people did get it. It's just many people stopped playing. They stopped playing after they realized what it truly was or what it is. And the sales were definitely bad, don't get me wrong. We saw the price drop like no other. And that's another issue on Bethesda's part, because that pisses off the fans that were willing to pre-order and buy your game right away. I'm sure many people that risk that money for 76 aren't going to do the same for the next Bethesda title unless they're diehard fans and the next title really jumps out at them. But really, they shouldn't. They should take this as a lesson to not pre-order and kind of breathe and look and make sure that these games are worth the cost. Because if they're not, and if these games aren't selling well, just a couple weeks after we buy them, these companies will cut the price to get more players on it, and you could have saved so much money, which matters to us. It doesn't matter as much to these giant corporations. So, I think ultimately from Fallout 76, Bethesda has tarnished its reputation a whole lot. It has hurt its PR in a lot of different ways, and it has really, even with pretty strong fans, like as I've admitted myself, they have really shot themselves in the foot. They really made themselves look bad, and I'm very apprehensive to see what they're coming out with next. I am excited for the Elder Scrolls 6, but I'm worried because I want a good game. I really, really don't want Fallout 4, in my opinion at least, to be the last good Bethesda game. I don't believe, and I'm not really part of this hype train that's saying Bethesda's dead and all of this other dumb stuff that the company showing how bad of game designers they are and whatnot. I just think this was a perfect storm of somewhat of their self-arrogance, bad design decisions, outdated Bethesda mechanics, and actions that were allowed to continue by people like me that would buy their games because they had made better design choices and created a better world, and ultimately bad economic decisions, at least economic decisions that prioritize game design and gameplay and the fun of the player. So Fallout 76, in my opinion, is the worst Bethesda game. It's the worst Fallout game, and it will live on its legacy as such. I'm hopeful that Bethesda can rebound, but I am a lot more avant-garde with them. I really want to see better graphics. I want to see a better game. And I definitely want to see a much better story, and I want to see a much better created world than Fallout 76 was. I'm hopeful that they won't create another monstrosity, though I am worried that while they might not create a Fallout 76, they might create a game that isn't up to what I think of Bethesda, at least in their stereotypical games to me. I'm afraid that Bethesda may be getting out of date, and Bethesda may be getting passed up by the rest of the gaming industry, at least in certain aspects, especially in that game engine and especially in graphics. And I want to hope that they can adjust to this, and only time will tell, and rampant speculation and conversations like this, you know, they're just our opinions, and we don't know what will end up happening. I hope, and my ultimate hope for the future is that Bethesda got hit in the mouth a bit with this one. They realized that they burnt a lot of bridges that they had been allowed to cross or even built for them with games like Fallout 4 and their previous Elder Scroll and Fallout games. And my hope is that they learn that. They take this hit, and that encourages them to build a better game in Starfield and a better game in Elder Scrolls 6. Well, ultimately time will tell, but we'll see. Well, thank you all so much for watching this. This has been podcast for week 2 of 2019. If you like this podcast, please make sure to leave a like. It helps me understand if you guys want me to continue this series. If you guys are interested in seeing more or interested in receiving news or updates when I post our podcasts or want to see anything else on my channel, please make sure to subscribe. This has been Alias Leonidas, And this has been Podcast by the Fire. I'll talk to you in the next podcast. Ciao for now.